Hi, I'm Dr. Kyla, paediatric dietitian, fussy eating specialist, and mum of two. I'm the founder of the online Mealtimes memberships that help parents just like you experience a confident and guilt-free way of feeding children. I'm also a business owner, a hot cross bun lover, and my superpower is finding things that you cannot live without. In this podcast, I'm talking about feeding your family, along with a random selection of topics that tickle my fancy. Welcome to Mealtimes with Dr. Kyla. Okay, so in today's episode, we are talking about some of the recent headlines that you might have seen about cow's milk as a replacement for infant formula. I have one of my favorite dietitians in the world, Gina, joining me, one of the Mealtimes team. She's here to give her expert opinion too. Welcome to the potty again, Gina.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
We have been doing a little bit of digging around this, and we have been having our own conversations, and we thought, right, this needs to be a conversation heading out into the world. So basically what had happened was there was reporting, particularly in the Australian media, in kind of April time, because I remember it was school holidays and I was like scrambling to try and kind of make sense of it, that the World Health Organization had changed their guidelines to say that infants aged 6 to 11 months could safely have cow's milk in place of formula. Do you remember reading the comment from one of our team when she shared the article, Gina?
Yes, and I just had a look. I was like, was it a weekend? But no, it was like Monday morning, first thing Monday morning. And she shared a screenshot in one of our work channels. And I immediately was thinking, how have we not heard about this?
Like, we did not even know this was on the cards, like cow's milk instead of formula for babies. Like, that's a big change. And we were scrambling, like, where has this come from? We went digging, and what we found kind of raised more questions than answers, would you say?
Lots of questions. Yes.
Yeah. And more recently, our NHMRC, which is kind of the council in Australia that makes a lot of recommendations based on health, has come out to say that in Australia, we are not accepting that change. We are not going to be changing our infant feeding guidelines based on the WHO change, which I think was reassuring because we had done a lot of digging to think like, we don't really agree with this. And yeah, so we're going to talk you through why we maybe don't agree with this, and why it's not our standard recommendation for parents to use cow's milk as a drink before the age of 12 months in Australia. Just to clarify, cow's milk protein is one of the common allergens for children in Australia. It's one of the ones that we do want to introduce before 12 months, and it is safe to introduce yogurt or a small amount of cow's milk in kind of baking or in cereal or cheese or any kind of cow's milk product. What we're not recommending is cow's milk as a drink, so in large volumes that replaces or displaces breastfeeding or infant formula. So really the only two safe drinks for babies as a kind of fluid is breast milk and formula. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You happy with that? Okay. So the WHO has said, no, you could give your child cow's milk after the age of 6 months in place of infant formula. And so we went digging as to where that had come from. And maybe, Gina, you can kind of talk me through what you found initially.
Yeah, so essentially, as soon as we got that media screenshot in our group channel, I went straight to Google and just thought, okay, I need to get a little bit of background here. And I was quite surprised that all I could find was a systematic review, which initially I was like, great, a systematic review, that's, a good start. But it was from January of 2022. And so already I thought, oh, well, this isn't like research that has, just come out.
This is over 2 years old. Like the world has not been set on fire from this.
And like we do know that there is usually a bit of a lag in the time the science gets translated into guidelines, but still it seemed really strange that this was now. And then when I looked at the WHO guideline, the changes were from October last year. So then again, it was like, okay, so how many months have passed now? And we're really only just sort of hearing about this. There wasn't much discussion about it back then either.
Yeah, because it feels like that it's a big change to say worldwide cow's milk is safe as a main drink for babies. And so for it to have taken 6 months for us to have heard about the WHO changes feels like they weren't publicized, but also like, why now? Why is this coming out now?
Yeah, I agree with you. It almost felt like we're just going to change this, but not put it out into the world, really.
Yeah, that's it. And also there was some weird reporting at the time of like the Australian Breastfeeding Association being really supportive of it, but there was no chat from the ABA about anything around this. So it felt a bit prank-like. Like it was after the 1st of April, but it felt weird. And we've had lots of questions in our member group, particularly in baby mealtimes, like, is this a thing? Do you know, it would save me a lot of money if that was still safe to do.
Yeah.
So we'll talk through kind of what that means. Basically, for context, Gina was talking about the systematic review that this report was based on. And a systematic review is essentially like a review of all the published literature on a topic. And the authors kind of put all the studies together, analyze them, appraise them, make sense of them, draw conclusions, and then kind of recommendations can be built on systematic reviews. Like that is a reasonable process. We have some concerns though with how this has been done. Do you want to talk us through like what the report actually showed originally?
Okay, so the systematic review that we're talking about, the one from 2022, showed that there was low certainty evidence, and we will touch on what that actually means later, that cow's milk has a similar impact on growth as infant formula between 6 and 11 months. So that's essentially saying that, okay, babies that had cow's milk versus babies that had formula, their growth didn't seem to be different. What did also concern us and was also found in this report was that, again, the low certainty evidence was that offering cow's milk could actually increase the risk of iron deficiency and anemia. So basically that meant that the babies that were having cow's milk instead of formula were at a greater risk of having iron deficiency and anemia.
Well, that's not great. Like that is not something we want babies to have.
No.
So from a growth perspective, from a cognitive development perspective, like concerns around that. So essentially like babies will probably grow, but there's a likelihood that they will have low iron and anemia as a result. Right. So interestingly, when we look at the actual systematic review, so that's the kind of findings from there. When we look at what actually is in the review, like one of the big concerns for me is that this review actually, like the conclusion was more research is needed.
Yeah.
And so like WHO have made a change to worldwide guidelines based on one systematic review that says, yeah, like the evidence isn't great. Do you want to talk us through the low certainty evidence as our next step?
Yeah. So when we're talking about low certainty evidence, we'll try not to get too technical on you here. It's not the lowest of all evidence. So there is there is very low certainty evidence. So it could be worse, but essentially it's the second from the lowest. And it essentially means that there's not enough evidence to be confident in the study findings. And so that means that what they've found is happening could actually be completely different if you redid the study.
So basically, we don't know. Like it could be, but the chance of it not being is also high.
Yeah.
Wild. Yeah, it's a maybe.
Yes.
Okay. We've got low certainty evidence. The review is calling for more research to be done. There is an incredibly small number of studies in the actual review. What were the numbers that we found?
And so I found this quite alarming, is that when we're thinking about the outcomes, so they looked at both the weight and the length in these studies, there were only 3 studies included in the review of weight and only 2 in that full length. So it's based on 5 studies, right? And in both of those, participant numbers were also fairly low considering they've made a worldwide guideline.
And when we think about that, so 3 studies to show that like growth is probably not affected if you use cow's milk, but it was based on like 500 or so participants.
Yes.
So we're literally extrapolating that to the world. Like I just can't fathom that.
Yes, we would like you'd want thousands and thousands for
you
this.
would want to be really clear. And I guess that's part of, our concerns with this study is that we actually don't have enough evidence that this is a safe recommendation. Like, we don't know, one of the statements in the study was the use of cow's milk in infancy has been associated with gastrointestinal blood loss, iron deficiency anemia, and increased solute load for kidneys. Like, we know that. And so, I mean, maybe we can talk through those specifically. Like, why are those kind of topics a concern for us? I mean, let's start with anemia. So when we looked at the studies, like, talk me through what you kind of took away from that.
Well, like as you said previously, iron is so important for babies and they do need a lot of it. And so it's, got such a role in their growth and their cognitive development at that age, as well as other things, immune function, all sorts of things. So we really do harp on a bit about iron. It's probably the main nutrient. It is the main nutrient really that we are concerned about when we're talking about introducing solids. And so if offering cow's milk can increase the risk of iron deficiency and anemia, that was definitely a red flag for me. I was thinking, oh, this is not an appropriate swap if that could be the outcome here.
And it's interesting because we don't really know enough about the mechanism either, do we? Like, cow's milk and anemia, there's a relationship, but we actually don't know how high levels of cow's milk actually cause anemia. And so that is a really interesting recommendation, I guess. Knowing what we know, we don't know. Is it actually that high iron foods are displaced by cow's milk? Is there something in the cow's milk that makes it hard for iron to be absorbed? Is it to do with, because we know that gastrointestinal blood loss is potentially related to cow's milk consumption. So is it that we've got kind of kids with mild cow's milk allergies who are losing blood in their gut? Is it to do with the size of the protein? Is it problematic for kids? Like, we actually don't know for babies why that might be happening, but we know it does happen.
Yes.
Don't you feel like unless we know more about that mechanism and being able to
counter that mechanism, then it doesn't feel like it makes sense. Exactly.
Yeah, they did refer to, like, you would have to consider iron screening. You'd have to be looking at potentially iron supplements. It's like that is a whole heap more to do, to buy, to think about. It just brings up a heap, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah, lots. I think the main thing is that while we don't really know what the exact mechanism is, it's probably most likely a combination of all of them. And so that actually probably makes it harder to, counter and allow for if there's so many different contributing factors going on.
Wild. And I think kidney function's not dissimilar, really, is it? Like, we don't know the exact mechanism as to how cow's milk can potentially impact kidney function.
Yeah. So the idea is that it can increase the solute load, and whether that means that could place a strain on the kidneys, something like that, we don't really know. So it's that thing of, if we don't know for sure it's going to be safe,
can we make a recommendation to the world?
Exactly.
No. I mean, we suspect that some of this change was related to formula shortages during the pandemic, and potentially in kind of developing countries, some unsafe or kind of unsanitary conditions, like not having access to safe drinking water to make up infant formula, or infant formula being incredibly expensive or hard to access, and so not being made up to the standard, like being diluted or being spread thinly, and potentially impacting families more than cow's milk would. But again, like, this is a worldwide recommendation, like particularly in the cost of living crisis that a lot of people, the world is experiencing at the moment. Like, to make a recommendation like this, if it's just based on
that
shortages or unsafe water, is wild. We did a bit of calculations around the cost. So we kind of found that on average, and we went on the cheaper end of things.
Yeah, we did. We didn't go for the high spec formula.
So a tin of formula, roughly $20, makes up around 7 litres, and it's looking at about $2.77 a litre to offer to babies. Cow's milk is about $1.77 a litre, so
Mm.
kind of almost half the cost, which is considerable.
That is a difference, isn't it?
Is a big difference. What would be your recommendation, Gina, if a family can't afford infant formula in Australia? What would be your next step?
And it's tricky because I'm sure there are families in this situation as well.
Absolutely. And especially at the moment.
Yes, it's such a tricky time. Definitely it would be first off sort of reaching out to your GP to make sure that you can actually check in that your child is okay as well, and whether they can direct you to some services. If they're not already linking in with food banks, and other women's shelters, those kind of places can sometimes stock formula. And then if they knew you were needing it, potentially they could help you source some. And you know what, we even sort of spoke about this worst case scenario, presenting to an emergency department if you're unable to feed your child, because at least then they may be able to link you in with some social work services that can sort of get you back
Can
on track.
advocate for you as well and think about what
Exactly.
it looks like. Yeah, it wouldn't be, because I guess for us, the take-home message with this is that the more we looked into it, the more we looked into the individual studies, it's really confusing as to why this guideline was put out and why it was put out without enough disclaimers in
Yes.
my mind.
Yes.
There's just not enough evidence to recommend worldwide change. And we worry that advice like this is taken as like just it's easy enough to offer either, choose what you prefer, when I don't think the evidence supports that.
No. And essentially that's it. We're sort of thinking, well, if you can access formula and you can make it safely and all of those things, then absolutely we would want you to be choosing that. If there's other circumstances going on, then there's probably an intermediate step of, trying to get access to or seeking support before we'd even really be considering this as an option.
Yeah, I think that's a really great summary. And that's like our advice is don't change a thing. Like our infant feeding guidelines, they are old. They are 12 years old, but we would advocate for updates to those. But we actually wouldn't change the recommendation around not having cow's milk as a drink before the age of 12 months. And we would suggest that anybody in a situation where they can't access or afford formula talks to people in their kind of circles before moving to cow's milk as the main drink.
Yeah.
Great summary. We've talked a lot about this in our own time.
We
so
have.
on the potty and record it. But would love to hear feedback from anyone else who has seen this reporting or has kind of been delving into the evidence themselves, if there's any health professionals. We are always up for a debrief about this. So thanks for joining me, Gina.
Thanks for having me.
Legend. A huge thanks for tuning in and listening to my podcast. This is all brand new for me, so I'd love to hear your feedback. Give me a review or send me a DM. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And above all, I'd really love you to hit that subscribe button to keep listening. Thanks.